Well, welcome. Thank you so much for coming out today, it's a momentous occasion, and so very pleased that you've come out to join us in marking this 10-year anniversary of Katrina. The city, as I'm sure you have noticed, has been filled all week with major events centered around this occasion, and the Rockefeller Foundation is in town. The Atlantic Magazine is in town. Journalists are crawling all over the city, and I'm sure you've been reading, if you've been following the national newspapers and press all week, actually for a couple of weeks, there have been daily stories focusing on the looking back on the past 10 years, looking at the significance of the storm and the progress of New Orleans since then. So, and that's all obviously highly appropriate given the scale of the calamity that occurred here 10 years ago and its significant implications for national policy, actually global policy, in so many areas, touching disaster recovery and environmental policy and economic development and social justice and everything in between. But it's also fitting that we take the opportunity here at the law school to mark this occasion within our own community because Katrina, of course, was an event that was not only an internationally significant occasion, but it is also obviously an intensely local event. I was not here for Katrina since my family arrived here 5 years ago, and so we did not live through that experience. But whether you did yourselves or have, like me, come since, I know that you have learned also that everyone who was here during that time in 2005 has their own Katrina story, and that those stories are filled with remarkable hardship and heroism and grit and resilience, and it's one of the things that, as I have come to learn more about what all members of this community lived through during that time, it just gives me the most profound and deep respect for this place and this community and the character of the people who define it. We have two occasions planned to mark this anniversary. The first here this afternoon is really more of a personal look back, reflections on the impact of the storm on our community from faculty, staff, and then students who were here in 2005. And then we have another program next Monday, also from 4:30 to 6 in this room, that will be showcasing faculty research and engagement in all the years since Katrina, but especially looking at some recent research and engagement from faculty that are yielding lessons from the terrible experience of Katrina to build a better society. And so we'll have faculty here looking at the environmental legacy and what progress we've made, have yet to make, also in terms of criminal and social justice, and in terms of government and politics as well. So I invite you back for that event next Monday at that time. So without further ado, I'm going to get out of the way and introduce to you the panelists who are here, and we've asked each of them to start out just by sharing a Katrina story of their own. It doesn't have to be a personal story, but a story related to the events of 10 years ago, and that will open up what obviously we hope will be an informal conversation with you as well, and invite anyone here to contribute a comment or a perspective or a question as well as we get underway. So let me now introduce our panelists who have generously come to participate today. We have, of course, Tanya Tetlow, who is the Felder-Fayard Professor of Law, and until last year, the director of our Domestic Violence Clinic, and now, since stepping out of that role, the Associate Provost for International Affairs here at Tulane. Professor Tetlow was brand new on the ground here at Tulane in August 2005 as a brand new member of our faculty, but was then, I think, 10 years out of law school, and was transitioning as an assistant United States attorney here in New Orleans before coming to join the faculty. Carlos Davia Caballero. Carlos, welcome back. A 1997 graduate of the law school here, went on to practice in San Diego and New York before coming home to Tulane once again as the assistant dean for career development and diversity initiatives. He is now the director of diversity and inclusion at Cleary Gottlieb, Steen and Hamilton in New York City. And so grateful to you for returning back to New Orleans for this. Colleen Timmons, of course known to everyone here, both then and now, our Assistant Dean of Academic Services. In that role, as you know, she has responsibility for overseeing the academic operations of the school, and both in terms of all the moving pieces of the schedule and keeping students on track towards graduation, daunting under any circumstances, under normal circumstances, unimaginable in 2005. Mike DiPetrillo, of the class of 2007. Sorry, I'll get back to you. Mike DiPetrillo of the class of 2007 was a 2L when Katrina rolled ashore. He's a native of Long Island and had worked in broadcasting and an AmeriCorps volunteer in Baltimore before coming to law school here. Since graduating, he's practiced with Jones Walker here in the city, where he is now a partner in the Business and Commercial Litigation Group. And Avion Brown-Pichon is a member of the class of 2008. She's a native New Orleanian. She earned her bachelor's degree from Howard University and also a master's degree in elementary education. She taught in Teach for America in Philadelphia before coming to Tulane as a 1L in August 2005, just 10 days or something before,
I think it was about a week.
Katrina came ashore. Since graduating, she spent 5 years practicing also at Jones Walker and helped to found Jones Walker's education law group before departing to launch her own firm. So thank you all so much again for being here, and I will now step aside and ask each of the panelists if they would just to share their own reflections. Tanya, will lead us off?
Is this on? Yeah. So my Katrina story, and then Dave asked me to also set the stage a little bit about what happened with Tulane. I had just started on the faculty, as he told you, with Professor Gabe Feldman. Unlike Professor Feldman, I was a local, so I'd actually offered after that first week of school, I was going to give him a tour of New Orleans and things he would not otherwise see, like the Ninth Ward in Chalmette, not realizing that did not and would not happen for a very long time. It was the first week of school. We had just started teaching, and then the order came to evacuate. I left to stay with friends very nearby, which was the first time growing up here I'd ever evacuated for a hurricane. My parents, who have many graduate degrees in languages between them and not a lick of common sense, decided that they would stay in the Broadmoor area where they lived then with my disabled sister. So that's what they did. And their house flooded. They had a raised basement house, so they were upstairs safely. But in the next week, I had a really hellish set of decisions to make about whether to pull every string I had, having just left the U.S. Attorney's Office, knowing people in the governor's administration, to try to get them rescued, because they're elderly, because my dad has heart problems, because they were doing things like moving the piano into a dryer room, versus knowing that there were a lot of people who needed rescued much more quickly than my parents. And it was an agonizing set of choices about how I would feel if something happened to them versus how I would feel if I jumped the line somehow and other people suffered. They did finally leave in their canoe to the school with a helicopter to the I-10 where they baked in the sun for a day, and then another helicopter to the airport where I picked them up. So it was a 12-hour journey, but they got out. And we had a period of being out of the city and let back in September. And during this period, the leadership of Tulane moved to Houston and set up camp very, very quickly. And included was our dean then, Larry Poneroff, who was part of that leadership team that did extraordinary work that really has never been quite heralded enough to keep this place open, because they were continuing to pay all of us a salary because out of generosity, but also because if they didn't, a lot of people would have quickly moved on to other jobs as they were evacuated elsewhere around the country. But there was suddenly no income and a lot of outgoing money, and I can't tell you how close this place came to closing. So there was extraordinary work going on from there. And meanwhile, back at the ranch, the city reopened late September, came back in. A lot of my colleagues went elsewhere because they had kids they had to put in school, because they had homes that they could go back to. I had an offer from one of my old professors at Harvard to go up there and do a job he would make up for me, but I really could not imagine being somewhere where people did not understand, because the little bit I traveled, people asked me the stupidest questions, and I just didn't have the patience for it. So that is the nature of kind of a collective tragedy. There are pluses and minuses to it, but one thing is that everyone gets it, and they don't ask you things like why your city exists. But being here was surreal. It was empty. There were no children because there were no schools in which to put them. There were no birds. It was very, very quiet. There were troops everywhere. I remember Professor Hancock asked me if I would please go into her house and feed her cats, and there was a window open that I could get in, and I was going in her front window with a bag of cat food, hoping that the military wouldn't come and shoot at me and say, "Cat food, I have cat food." But it was incredibly surreal. I felt very powerless because I had just left a job where I had a badge and I could have done things with Jim Letton, and instead was a law professor. So I started writing a law review article about Katrina, but that somehow didn't feel like enough. So I was also on the library board, the city library board at the time this happened, which was a very boring, mundane little civic duty until most of the libraries flooded. So I threw myself into that in the semester that we were shut and helped raise a lot of money to rebuild those branches. Tulane was faced with figuring out how to reopen quickly, and they knew they needed a city in which to do it. And so they were making decisions about, if we have to build our own grocery store for the students and faculty and staff to shop in, that's what we're going to do. The city came back enough to allow them to reopen in January, and you're going to hear some more about what that was like of being on campus and how Tulane made it work. But they had to do things like sponsor Lusher Charter School so that there would be quickly a school open for employees' children to go to, right? It was that much interdependence on the city and Tulane. Neither could properly exist without the other. We are the largest private employer in the city, and it was a massive sort of codependence. So you'll hear in the next panel next week about how much Tulane did for the city to help it get back, but just functioning here economically was a big part of that. A few faculty and many staff and many students lost their homes and lost everything, so there were real efforts to get people back on their feet. There was a lot of distraction about that when we came back. There was also a lot of guilt about complaining. I remember the conversations we had when you would see somebody for the first time. "How'd you make out?" And they'd say, "I'm fine." And then I'd say, "Does that mean you lost everything you own but nobody died?" And they'd say, "Yes." And that's how it worked, because you did not feel like you could whine about whatever you went through. Somebody went through worse. And one of the most agonizing conversations I had was when I found a very dear friend of mine for the first time coming back into the city, and we had that conversation, went around the circle, and she said, "Well, my ex-husband, who was still her best friend and the father of her daughter, had surgery right before the storm and was in a hospital. And after they finally evacuated the hospital days later, he got infections from the floodwaters and died. And that remembering that, and remembering also the kind of divisions in New Orleans that disproportionately affected the poor and African Americans, and that in many ways, as much as I feel like I know every third person on the street in the city, that I had more connections to people who died in 9/11 than in Katrina, that there was that much division in the city, and it reminded all of us of that. Ultimately, it was a long, hard haul. It was not a trauma that was sudden and went away. It was years of struggling and dealing with FEMA, which was suicide-inducing, and insurance companies, and battling with all that, and finding a contractor who could rebuild your house. I had a raised basement house, and my basement flooded, so I was fine, but it took me about 4 years to get it fixed. And that kind of trauma and stress that went on for a very long time, that our students went through, that all of us went through. And beyond that, the things I hate most in life are change, uncertainty, and leaving New Orleans. So it was not fun. But I won't use the word resilience because it makes me want to throw up if I hear it one more time this week. But we did learn that the hard way. You know, my Irish Catholic grandmother always used to say, that which does not kill you makes you stronger. We got real strong and we got real tight. And something that really mattered, I think, about this place was that suddenly, if you came back here, if you lived here, or if you moved here after the storm, it was because you wanted to be here. And to have a city full of people who really wanted to be here and really were willing to sacrifice to be here made it an extraordinary place. Let's go next.
Sure. Hi. So my story is a little bit different. By way of background, I was born and raised in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I am very familiar with hurricanes. It was ingrained from a very young age. It was part of the normal cycle, just like summers and winters. We didn't have change of seasons. We had hurricane season. So it was amazing to me to live through Katrina and be part of that. In a community that was also, there were so many parallels. They too, we knew, everyone here knew about hurricanes. We had scars from previous hurricanes, and we knew that this big one could possibly hit us any hurricane season. So it was always very surprising to me how unseriously, if that's even a word, people took it. And after several faux Katrinas and loading up the cars multiple times and evacuating, while my local friends would always stay behind and throw parties and grill and get rid of everything that was in the fridge that could perish during the 1 or 2 day post-hurricane assault that they would envision, I started to pick up on certain things. So that's just by way of background. So let's hit the pause button. Let's go to the Katrina story. So as they mentioned, I was the assistant dean of the Career Development Office at the time, and also the Diversity Office for the law school. There were 10 people that reported to me. I was digging up the emails, and I've kept every single one of them. So thank you, Abby, for reaching out to me. And I, like any good lawyer, I started to refresh my recollection as to what really happened, because I started to, there's a Katrina story that I recall, that I feel, and then what really happened. This is, we all know the famous date of August 29th. This is an email that went out to my 9 members, and you can do the math, on September 6th. Dear team, I am glad to hear you are all safe and doing well in light of the difficult circumstances. You might have heard by now that we have planned a conference call for tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll move forward to the email, so ... Finally, if anyone has any ideas on how we may be able to contact David Webster, please share them. We believe he evacuated the city on Saturday, but we have not heard from him. I think that's what captures the story of Katrina. The not knowing where the colleagues were, but knowing that we had a business at hand. And I think everyone that's here that was part of the Tulane community at the time, students included, knew that we had a business to do, whether it was a first-year law student and the business of being a law student, or as a faculty administrator and being part of, we're going to bring back and we're going to rebuild this city. So lo and behold, so that email goes out. Why did it go out? Because by then, this was September 6th, I had already been in contact with many of the students, some that are sitting in the back row, emailing me and inquiring, what's the plan, what's going on, are we coming back, do I enroll in a different law school, will we have a law school to return, how are the job prospects affecting me, is a career program in California taking place, you name it. We had over 800 students reaching out. Colleen is here to my left. She knows the emails as well as I do. And meanwhile, we've got no resources. The technology was a dismal failure. That was one of the lessons that we learned. We had no way of really connecting to each other as a community. This was the precursor of social media and mobility and day, so it's not like we were all in Facebook chatting away and instant messaging each other. Most of our cell phones didn't work, so we're doing snail email, telephone lines, reaching out to families and colleagues that we barely had. We were trying to solve the puzzle of where everyone was. Going back, I know I'm jumping a little bit on the storyline, but out of the 10 people that reported, I mentioned one was missing. That person was in the 9th Ward. Completely discommunicated. His story is more powerful in the sense that he was one of those that were rescued from the roof. And that he had made reservations for a car, but by the time that he got to the airport, all the people that had been dropped off from their planes and been told to evacuate the city were taking the cars. For many of the New Orleans citizens that didn't own a car, as we talk about the different economies that exist within our city then and now, he was one of those that found himself trapped here in the city, returning to the 9th Ward and struggling for the city. So the others, where did they end up? And I will list their names. It may not mean much to some of you, but it means the world to me. Sharka Sharna-Fagan was in New York, Laura Yarrow in Georgia, Tara Yaguli in Alaska, and that's a footnote because we had just hired Tara, and she is a native of Alaska, and she had left her residence in Alaska, moved to New Orleans. We had just gotten her trained in 2 weeks. She had never gotten a paycheck from Tulane, ended up evacuating, ended up going back to her family in Alaska, and still had not received 2 months later a single penny from the university because she was never in payroll for the first time. And the only when Tanya mentioned that people were getting paid, it was only because there was the memory of checks, magnetic strips, that the university was able to recreate checks. But this person had never appeared on the roster, so basically she worked gratis for 4 months. And I asked her to come back from Alaska to relocate to Texas, where I put her up with one of my friends and also Tulane alum, who was a partner at one of the big firms in Dallas, and who graciously found housing for her and actually brought her into the firm to use the office and to shadow while we were resolving. Continuing on, Russa Kittredge, she was temporarily in Arizona. Adam Mays was in Kansas. Susan Saluski was first in Mississippi, then Rhode Island. Joey Saunier was the only one that stayed here in Louisiana. And Susan Krinsky didn't report to me. I reported to her as the associate dean, and she was in between Pennsylvania, Montana, and every other state that you can think of. So as you can see, there was not a single match. I myself was in New Jersey, traveling all across the country. So that's what we were dealing with, and not even a week into it, we were still working. We still ran all the interview programs. We were reaching out to employers, alumni. The Department of Justice created internships for many of our students. One of the best stories that speaks about the human spirit was that we had close to a dozen students working in Hawaii. How did they end up in Hawaii? Maybe Avion can talk a little bit if she knows any of those. I have their names and their email, but it was a graduate of '04 who was clerking at the time in the federal court who reached out to the legal community in Hawaii. They actually made a public announcement, and lo and behold, 12 people ended up that were in California, decided, well, we're in California, why not go to Hawaii? So they ended up working in the clerkships throughout the federal system and with the larger firms in Honolulu. And that was the kind of energy that was happening. Some were amazing stories, and some were heart-wrenching stories, because that clearly wasn't the case for all the students, and that wasn't the case for all of the people involved. I'll quickly mention what I learned, I think, about the experience. We've already mentioned, well, I looked up the word Katrina just to see what does it mean, and in German it means pure. And that stuck with me, that resonated with me, because to me, Katrina was purely personal. Everyone lived a different story and took different lessons from it. And to me, it's something that you just, I always said that New Orleans and Tulane is a place that leaves an imprint on you. Well, now there's another imprint in there embedded within the city and the university, which is Katrina. It's also purely transparent. Katrina didn't create many of the woes that we suffered. They were here, visible in front of all of us every single day, but we chose to look the other way, and we were living life as we saw fit. And Katrina brought and shed light into everything that we had been ignoring for decades, generations, whether it was class divide, whether it was racism, whether it was sexism, all of it came brutally to the light. And Louis Brandeis once said, sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants. And I think that's something that I learned from Katrina, because it did. We had to face up. Our time was up, and we now had to wrestle with all the demons that we had ignored for so long. And it was also purely transformative. It's one of those experiences that I think I'm a better person more than anything else. I'm a better, I think, citizen, human, colleague, friend, all of it. What people lost, it's so hard to say, because everyone measured their success or existence or losses differently. For me, you can say that it cost me a personal relationship, but I gained twice as much, and I'm in a much better place now. Colleen?
I know how to follow that.
You can. I'm sure you can.
My personal story, Katrina was quite hard to get through, I have to say. But I was here for a year, or at least at Tulane for a year, when Katrina came through. And I'd actually just bought my very first place. So I remember this distinctly, because I moved in Saturday and evacuated Sunday. So that was not fun. And I remember speaking to my family and saying, everything is just in boxes labeled. If they loot it, it's just going to be so easy. Just take it out. There's the china. There you go. So it was like, okay. So that was interesting. But I remember when I was actually, and I also was one of those people who never evacuated because I just didn't. We stayed. And so I had no plans to leave. And I remember a really good friend of mine, as I was at my apartment packing, and the movers were there, and she had come by and she had asked me, are you leaving? And at that time, they were still forecasting it to hit further away. It was going to be between Mississippi and Alabama. I was like, no, I'm not planning on leaving. And we had the television on, just sort of keeping an eye on it, listening in the background. And she's like, well, they're starting to form some lines at the gas station. Have you gassed your car up? No, I haven't. And so she left me her car. She's like, I'm going to leave my car here if you need it, and I'm going to take yours and get gas because I was in the middle of packing. And I said, okay. And I have told her this many times since then. I said, you know, you really saved me, because I had not. I was like maybe a quarter of a tank or less. If she had not done that one little thing, I wouldn't have been able to leave. I would have been trapped here as well. Unless I had gotten in with one of my friends or was smart enough to hitch a ride with somebody else who was leaving. But I was really thankful for her just having the foresight to ask me that question and then do that for me. But and then another friend, I wasn't leaving, and then Sunday, I think it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and my phone was ringing and ringing and ringing and ringing and ringing. And so I finally woke up, and it was another friend of mine who called me and said, we're going. It's going to come here. It's, you know, it's bigger than we thought. And then I got up and left. And I happened to hit it before contraflow, so I actually got out right in time before they hit contraflow. So I did not have to spend 8 to 10 hours on the road. I think it took me about 4 hours to get to Lafayette, because I had gone to Lafayette to stay with some friends. So it was a very interesting experience. The other thing that I remembered distinctly personally for me was I did come back early. I came back to campus. I got permission to come onto campus. I was going to the office to get the student records, to get the files, because we needed our admission records, the address list of where the students were, as well as the enrollment list, because we had to send out enrollment verifications to all these places that took in the students. So I remember I came back to campus early, and I was coming onto campus, and everybody here, they had cleanup crews and such that were here, and they were in hazmat suits, and I was in my shorts and flip-flops, and I'm like, maybe I should have something more protective on. I may have in trouble. But I came and got a lot of the records out, and then was going back and forth to Houston. The university had set up administrative offices in Houston after the storm to sort of develop a plan and to try to come up with a strategy and run the show, so to speak, from there. So I remember driving back and forth between Lafayette, where I was staying, in Houston, and just working with the registrar's office personnel that was on site there, just trying to reach out to the schools where the students were and trying to just verify enrollment. And one of the things, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but the other universities across the U.S. were so generous. I'd say most of them, not every single one of them, but most of them were so generous and so kind, and just because the students were coming in just off the street, basically saying, I'm a law student and I want to continue my studies, and they were just saying, okay, come in. And not only were they getting them into classes, but a lot of time their classes had already started, they were getting them books, they were getting them places to live, and this was just sort of sight unseen and not a document to be had. So they didn't have a transcript to give them or anything to, or most of them didn't have anything to give to the school to say, I really am a student, I really am a second-year student or a first-year student. And so I was trying to work on getting, first of all, like you said, the communication systems were down. Just trying to figure out where everybody was quite the undertaking. So we were using, I was actually contacting school by school. Who do you have? You know, who's there? Can you give me the students that you've taken in? So we were trying to create, and then students would call in or send email messages in saying, I'm at X university. Okay, so we were just trying to develop a list of where everybody was, and then getting those communications out and verifying all that. So again, it was not fun. It was a lot of work.
If you need that list, I have it.
I have it
actually
too. I do have it.
The Tulane email system was down. The server was down.
Yes.
And so the Tulane emails didn't work, and we didn't have everyone else's private email. So that's part of why it was so hard.
It was very, yes. Mm-hmm. So it's another reason why you have to give us your personal email now, your students, so we can help find you. The other thing that I remember, like they were saying, we were still getting paid, those of us who were already on the payroll, which is very thankful as an employee. I was still trying to pay my mortgage. And I remember that I was trying to make my first mortgage payment when I came back, the very first mortgage payment. And for some reason, I had trouble doing that online, amazingly enough. So I'm here early. This internet connection was very spotty. There's actually a picture of me in the Times-Picayune at the time. I was sitting outside the CC's Coffee House on Jefferson Avenue, me and about 10 other people sitting on the sidewalk, because you could access the Wi-Fi. Of course, that place wasn't open, but their Wi-Fi was still going. So you saw these little random people with their laptops sitting on the sidewalk because you could get Wi-Fi sitting outside CC's Coffee House. So I was literally there, and I was trying to go online and pay the mortgage and do other things, and for whatever reason, it was not taking the payment through the site. So I remember calling them, the mortgage company, and trying to make a payment over the phone. And it was, like you said, the military was here. It was sort of quiet. The military was here. And I was talking to her on the phone, and she was saying, well, why don't you just mail it in? And I was like, no, it's not possible for me to mail it in. There is no open post office. I would have to drive to Baton Rouge, I suppose. I don't know. Maybe I could do that. I said, you can't take it over the phone. And then as I was talking to her, I remember they were having the flights overhead, and I had the armed vehicles coming down the street. And so she's like, what's going on there? It's like, well, we had a hurricane. I don't know if you heard anything about it, but I just remember those surreal kinds of questions, or those idiotic kinds of questions that people would ask you were very interesting. One of the things also I remember is the resilience of the students in my personal conversations, and I do have a whole binder in the office of what I call Katrina it's labeled as that, Katrina correspondence. Just some of the students really amazed me in their level of resilience and their level of dedication. You would have students who were just here for their first year, and just the amount of work that they did trying to help the administration communicate with other students, and what they did when they came back, even those that did choose to come back, and we had over 80% of our student population who did return. What they did for the community, it was just absolutely amazing, and I think that's one of the things that touched me so greatly, is just to see how much the students actually did. They did more than I ever expected, and really made a difference in a lot of people's lives, I think. So I think that was wonderful. And they had organizations like From the Lake to the River. I remember that. Not only did our students help to develop that, but they even were able to bring in their student colleagues from around the country to come here and help with the rebuilding and the community efforts here. And that was just unbelievable to me. And then it kept up with their studies as well. So not only am I going to be an advocate for the community and do all this work, I'm still going to, keep up with my studies and rank high in my class. And it was just, they were fantastic. But it was a lesson in resilience. Sorry to use the word. And we are stronger for it. But I now know how important the communication lines are. I now know how important it is to really touch base with your student population and make sure they know what's going on with them and what their thought process is and what they want to do and what their visions are. So it was quite the lesson. I also learned a lot about my own family too. I remember I went to Monroe for a while. I'm from Monroe originally, and I was at my sister's house, and she was renovating her house at the time. And so I was one of those, as most of us were, glued to CNN or everything, looking for what's happening. Are they opening this neighborhood? Are they not opening that neighborhood? And I was staying in her house for a time, and she was very upset about the tile. She was laying the tile down on the floor, and she was very, very upset about it. It wasn't laying correctly. It wasn't straight. And I was just kind of wondering if the house was still there that I just bought, that everything was, in boxes in. And she was upset with me for not, commiserating with her on her misery of the horror of the tile. And I remember looking at her and said, if I figure out if I have a home, then I'll worry about your tile. But it was just, that kind of thing. And so you found out a lot about people, even the ones you love, during this kind of a situation. But I am really thankful that I got to know students that were here at the time. And I think I will always remember the Katrina class. I really will, because they were quite something.
So I'm realizing as everyone is talking how much of what happened to me and my family that I've actually blocked out. And so I have a flood of memories that I'll try to make into a cohesive Katrina story. I think for me, the biggest theme was this idea of autonomy versus interdependence with my family. I'm from New Orleans, like T. said, and I was the Katrina class. I had spent 2 years teaching in Philadelphia. Even though I'm from here, I went to undergrad in Washington, D.C., and had spent, I like to say I was reared on the East Coast. and had spent a lot of time being very independent, living by myself, and had just made the choice to come back to Tulane because of the reputation, but also because my mom said I could live at home for free. And literally went to 1 week of class and then had like all of my autonomy in like one fell swoop taken away because I was living with my mom and my sister. I had literally just moved all of my belongings, loaded them up on some 18-wheeler, and had them shipped to Philadelphia. I still live, after moving around a bit, but at that time in New Orleans East, and loaded it all into my mom's home. And that weekend, we really didn't think much about the storm. Like has been mentioned, that Saturday was one of my aunts, who's now deceased, birthday. We drove out to Covington to have to fry fish and had a really great time. And one aunt said to the next, you know, you guys really should stay the night. I think there's going to be a problem. And my mom was like, nah, we're going home. And, you know, she's a true matriarch, and so the rest of us just had to go rank and file. And so we got home Saturday night, woke up Sunday morning. I literally had to drag my mother out of the house. She just didn't believe that it was going to be a problem. And I think, you know, Sally Ann helped, and the mandatory evacuation order helped. But I think that for me, when I thought about like going from doing my own thing, being really excited about going to law school, actually feeling really isolated from the student population, living in New Orleans East, being a native, and then like going to live back at home and really having my mother to make all of the decisions. So we ill-advisedly loaded up into one car. I think I packed my most prized possession, which were Citizens of Humanity jeans, and went to Baton Rouge and wound up staying for 2 weeks while all of the drama unfolded in my aunt's home with 13 other people, where things came down to, what are we going to do about toilet paper? Where at one point, there were in-laws dropped off, one who had just done a stint in St. Gabriel, if anybody knows what that is, a jail. And so I remember feeling hopeless, isolated, and powerless, because I felt that I had been thrown into a situation that I did not have control over, with a lot of people that were not equipped emotionally to deal because of their connection to the city. My mother was born here, my grandmother was born here, and my great-grandmother was born here. So the idea of just being dislocated for so long. The couple of months between Katrina actually hitting and returning back to the city for me is actually quite a blur. We wound up in Birmingham. My mother worked for AT&T. They have a hub there. We stayed in a hotel for 2 months in one room. And so again, back to this idea of like interdependence, where I was like 1 week of law school, 2 years of teaching. I considered being a teacher in Birmingham. I considered all the other law schools that I had gotten into and whether I should go back there. Some of them, you know, reached back out.
Yep.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, and you know, you still have your scholarship, Avian. But I didn't want to leave my family, so I wound up working at Saks Fifth Avenue in Birmingham for 2 months, and it was the strangest experience. Because I enjoyed it, but I would talk to people and I would get into conversations with them and they would be like, "You're a law student?" And I remember this lady, she grabbed me, she's like, "Go back to law school, whatever you do." And so it was really a tough time. I remember trying to get a car and being told I didn't have an address, so I couldn't get a car. And I was very thankful for my time on the East Coast because I had so many friends who actually weren't experiencing the trauma. And I think that was probably the biggest part of being from New Orleans, is like you actually had nowhere to turn to. You couldn't call family members, you couldn't call friends, because everyone was experiencing the devastation and loss. And for me, living in New Orleans East, going to church in New Orleans East, my elementary through secondary education was all in New Orleans East. I actually just lost that part of my childhood. I could not and cannot visit the places where those things happened. They look completely different. They are different, or they may be different institutions. I lost the vast majority of childhood photos. These things are just like gaping holes in my childhood. So we came back to the city. My mom and sister came back first. I took the opportunity to be alone for a while and stayed with my manager from Saks Fifth Avenue. She was like, well, you know, and it was interesting because people I found were almost like looking for Katrina victims to help. I think it was a little different tone in Baton Rouge and Houston, but in Birmingham, people were very, very helpful. And I wound up coming back. I was actually really grateful to the university because they reached out to us early. I don't remember how you guys found me. I do remember Rob was in Hawaii. I didn't remember how he got there. But I remember the only thing that stuck out to me was this statement: listen, everybody come back. Don't go and enroll in another law school. We're going to make it so you still graduate on time. And I was like, awesome. This is a great idea. And so then when we returned, I realized that the plan was for us to go to school 6 days a week for 6 months. And I was like, oh. I thought y'all were going to cut the requirements. I see. So we got a full law school education. And I think, like, to the point made about our class, I just had dinner with Mike, even though he wasn't in the Katrina class. But I had dinner with Mike a month ago. I went to a classmate's wedding in April. I don't know if you guys have group me, but we have we like to call it the dark green wave because it's mostly the Black Law Students Association, but whatever. So we are close, and it's like we feel like we went through something together because we did. We didn't even have a lot of time to socialize outside of law school also. One extra tidbit, I remember a lot of Monday mornings I would start law school with tears, and my mom would be like, you know, every Saturday night you go out and then Monday morning you cry. Why are you doing this? 'Cause it was hard. It was hard. But I think the grit that I developed, which I revisited many times throughout my career and throughout law school, the determination that I developed, and the friendships that I think are just indestructible, it really, for me, made it a valuable experience. I can't say worth it, but a valuable experience. And I think now that moment for me is a pivotal moment in my life, and a moment that defines all other moments. There's my life before 24, pre-Katrina, and my life post-Katrina. And it's something that I think about often, and I always will.
So my story, I guess, I was a 2L at the time, but was also new to New Orleans and to Tulane because I had actually transferred in. So, and originally from New York, and I had started law school in New York, so I was actually only in New Orleans for about 2 weeks when Katrina hit. And so on some level, I was in a way sort of a first year in that I was new to everything and new to the environment and the experience. And so when I look back, I remember we had 1 week of classes, and then there was that first weekend where people were just excited. You had your first week of law school for the semester was done. People were having hurricane parties. I very much remember there was, people were emailing about hurricane parties and, different events to just kind of meet everybody from the school. And there wasn't really a sense that this was a big deal. At least I'm talking Friday, and even on Saturday, I just remember, you had the people like me that were not from New Orleans, and then you had the locals who said, oh, we always stay, we never evacuate. And I just remember there was I don't think anybody had a sense of, what was about to come. And obviously that all changed on Sunday when, the mandatory evacuation was issued. And I remember, specifically, I ended up evacuating to Dallas and left sometime that Sunday, drove with a group of people about 22 hours straight it took to get to Dallas with traffic and, obviously everybody evacuating. But I remember a lot of the students at that point, it was sort of, all right, who had I just met? Who had I talked to? Where are you going? Do you need a ride? People who weren't from New Orleans, didn't have family here. People were really trying to just make sure that we all left together or that we all had somewhere to go. And so I remember that happening. And then all of a sudden, I think people thought, I'll be back in a few days, so it'll be fine. And then, we know what happened. But right after that, there were sort of the questions when everyone realized the magnitude of what had happened. I just remember, everyone reaching out to the people that you knew, the students you knew, sort of, are you okay? Is your family okay? Where are you? And then obviously all the questions of, well, what are we going to do now? What is the law school going to do? Are they going to reopen? Are they going to move? How are we going to handle this? And, just a lot of overwhelming questions that, I think everybody was trying to figure out at the time. What I was so impressed with, and I remember specifically, is then the way that, the law school was able to communicate with us, was able to sort of reach out with opportunities. It went from, what am I going to do today or tomorrow, to other law schools opening, their doors to take students for a semester, law firms, government agencies around the country taking people in, and, we all sort of worked together to help everyone find a role, what they were going to do. I mean, I remember we started communicating, I think it was like a week after the storm, and I don't remember who it was, but somebody had set up some conference calls for some of the students to start talking on a regular basis, and we did that, and it pretty much continued for that entire fall semester and ultimately led to some of the great things I think that the students did post-Katrina. But we would have conference calls to talk about, where are people getting placed, what are they going to do, and then there was a very strong sense of, we want everybody back from the students. It was, we're not going to, accept people leaving. We want to give them a reason to come back. I remember I was looking back through old emails as well. I think a lot of us did that in preparing for this, and I found conference call minutes from, we created a student task force, and it was doing things like, we're going to set up a website that'll tell students what restaurants are back open, where they can live, what their options are, and just trying to reach out to everybody in that way. And I think it was, at the time when I look back, why were we doing that? I don't know if anybody gave it thought other than, this seemed like the only right thing to do. And I remember it impressed me how, we were working very closely with the faculty and administration on, obviously it was unprecedented, and trying to figure out what we're going to do next. And so it was really a pretty remarkable time. I mean, I ended up going to Dallas, staying there for about a week or so, and then ended up going back to New York, and I worked for a law firm there. I decided not to go to another school for that semester because I had just transferred and thought, I'll just work for this semester, and when I knew the school was going to open, absolutely go back. I think like a lot of people, I was so eager to try to get back here. I had an apartment. I mean, luckily, it was a second floor apartment I had just rented, moved into. Everything was in boxes pretty much still. I think I came back in October was the first time, and I mean, I just still remember how eerie it was, just quiet, no, especially at night, no street lights, there are very few people, Army vehicles, and it's just, those kind of memories absolutely stick in my memory, from my time. And, the other thing I think a lot about is what the students did then really was kind of remarkable. I mean, a lot of different groups kind of came out of, I think, the post-Katrina class and the people that that stayed here. I remember specifically, one of the groups we kind of formed post the whole hurricane was something called the Student Hurricane Network, which was one of the groups that had law schools from around the country send their students here to New Orleans to work with public aid organizations to help address some of the legal needs that were not being met in the city and in the region. And, it was something that was organized from here. It wasn't, and the response was overwhelming, and I think, students and schools around the country contributed, but it's remarkable that it was, the students here were the ones sort of on the ground, making that happen and getting people so involved and connected in this community. The other thing, I guess, the other thing I take away from the experience of Katrina was the fact that for me, not being from here, but going through that experience, it solidified the fact that there's nowhere else I want to be, and there's nowhere else I'd rather live, in the sense that, you saw people come together to just make things happen. And, I mean, it was sort of the shared experience, I think, that everyone went through, the students, led to a very close class connection. I mean, I think it is true. I think a lot of the students that were here, whether you were 1L, 2L, or 3L, I think the bonds that we have as graduates and alums of the school is incredibly close, closer than I have with undergrad or other experiences. And I think a lot of that is just because of what we went through, together as a class, and kind of what we did to make sure that the school, stayed open and continued to succeed. I mean, it's looking back through some of those emails about trying to find people to housing. I remember I found an email that had pictures of graduate housing when we came back was going to be a cruise ship, and there were pictures of kind of what if you needed housing, you'd be assigned to a cruise ship room, and if you needed to apply, looking back on some of those details, it's sort of, I mean, it's just stuff I hadn't thought about in a very long time, but it really was a pretty remarkable experience that I think we all went through, and I think it definitely defined and changed everyone in some small way or a large way, just depending upon your experience. But that's kind of my story and experience.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. And again, invite anyone here who wants to participate in the conversation to feel free to join in. So I'll just get us started again for the next one. But I wonder if you could say, any of you, from either the student perspective or from the faculty or administrative perspective, about sort of what the experience was as you came back, just a bit more about the experience coming back, because as I understand, you ran classes, again, you mentioned running classes 6 days a week for 6 months, and so running incredibly hard, doing double time, packing an entire year into 6 relentless months. And if you could just say a little bit more about what that experience was like.
I'll start off. We actually had 2 calendars, at least for the first year students, because there were students who chose, and of course we wanted them to continue their education if they could. So there were students who chose to visit elsewhere during that term, and then there were others who just wanted to wait and come back and start when we reopened. So we had 2 sort of different sets of first-year students, those who did do a term somewhere and those who do not. So then we ended up creating 2 different calendars. So there was what you would call a regular spring semester calendar for those who did have a semester done already. And then there was another, because we wanted to graduate everybody on time. We wanted to be able to not delay your graduation date. So there was another calendar that we had. We called it Spring 1 and Spring 2. and then so that you went 6 days a week. So it started in January to March, and then I think it was April to June, if my memory serves me correctly. So you did basically a year's worth of coursework in a 6-month period by going 6 days a week. And the class times were a little longer than normal. The normal term. So that was very interesting, and you weren't the only one who cried on Mondays. I'll let you know that. But again, it was just a testament to those students that you wanted to be here. And they did really well. There was a lot of questions that came up from the first year students, I remember, about ranking. So how are you going to do that? What's it going to mean? Is it going to make a difference in my job prospects? So we had to do a lot of thought process in how we were going to address rankings. We actually had 2 different sets of ranks for the first year students. One for those who only had 1 term here, and the other set for those who had a different experience. So we tried to keep it as
it's still one of the best ploys that any assistant dean for career development could have, because I basically ended up with a top 10 class that was actually 20%.
Yes.
But I could still market it as, oh no, they're in the top 10%. So it was a great little double dipping of sorts, fuzzy math that, it's like just toss Katrina here, Katrina there, and next thing you know, it's like 80% of the class is now employed. So keep moving on, keep moving on. They won't check the books.
I remember Professor Hopel in her Saturday morning classes would bring mimosas every week because she figured it was the least she could do. And it was very, which is totally not allowed for anyone to do going forward. It was an extraordinary thing for our then dean too, because he had to both thank all the law schools that took our students in, which made it possible for us to keep going, right? So they educated our students for free, let us keep the tuition money from that semester, but then also beg them not to be too generous with accepting transfer students, because that would have totally taken away all of our students and caused us to fail. And so without violating antitrust laws too much, ask that they not at least make special exceptions for the students to take students they would not have otherwise out of thinking they were being generous, which they were on an individual level, but it would have killed this institution. So he spent an awful lot of time talking to other law school deans about that. And one of the things that was nice to hear is both that some of our students did really well at some very fancy schools, so that was very gratifying. And also that they came back and had a lot of feedback for us about what their experiences were at all. They went to almost every law school around America, and that they really liked Tulane, and that they had incredible feedback that made us feel great about how much they preferred Tulane in various ways. And one of the things they said is how tight-knit it was, even before Katrina, especially afterwards.
I think the only other thing I'll add is from a kind of student life perspective, I remember is, we came back in January and started, and it really was, as Colleen said, you wanted to be here if you were here, because, just day-to-day life was not what it was before, in the sense of finding a grocery store. So few restaurants were open. Sort of going out didn't really happen because there was nowhere to go. There was no mail. You'd have to show up at a post office to get your mail. But day-to-day life, you learned, being from New York, I learned patience very, very quickly, because it was still learning, I guess. But the city was laid back, obviously, before Katrina, but after, and everyone was, but there was a lot of understanding, I think, in that we were all in that kind of shared experience of, what stores are open, what restaurants are open, where can I get this, and we were all in class, but then day to day, that was our life outside of class, and everyone was sort of in that same position. And I just kind of remember all those, when new places would open. Finally, people were so excited, and whatever restaurant it was, and it was just, or whatever supermarket, or, dry cleaning, which I don't even think existed for a long time after.
It was a while.
Yeah, so.
Could you give us like a day in the life? You get up, it's Monday, you're crying. Walk us through the day. What were your class like? What did you do?
Okay, well, I'm going to try. So I'll take Monday, because I do remember tears. I'll start like a Saturday evening, like, or right after class, you get kind of like this surge of energy because class is over for the week. I had a very good friend, Lorianne, who is now in Minneapolis practicing. And so, like, we would literally, like, go to the mall, spend all day in the mall. No, that's not true. There was no mall.
No.
No.
Well.
So, sorry, that was in the second year. But,
Different life.
Different life. We did do that a lot during law school, though. So it was really a series of, like, back-to-back classes. And it was almost a lot like my high school where we didn't switch classes a lot because we were in a lot of the same courses. And, you know, I really have blocked so much of the day-to-day out. I remember that we were staying in a parsonage. There's an AME church on Cadiz that had a parsonage attached that we stayed at. I remember going back home to make sandwiches for, like, me, and I don't know if you guys remember Janice Williams. But I just remember the days being very, very long and, like, spending a lot of time with classmates. But I remember being excited when there were different food places. Mike, do you remember, like, a day-to-day?
Well, I guess, I came back and just ended up, I was not on the Spring 1, Spring 2 schedule. But I know a lot of people that did, and it was grueling. But I think we all, you know, in my case, I worked that semester, but I didn't want to, I still wanted to graduate on time, so I ended up bulking up on credits along the way. And I think I had to get special permission from, might have been you, Colleen, my 3L second semester. I think I took like 21 credits, which was not a fun experience.
We don't do that anymore.
Right. You know, it was just, but everyone, I don't know, I just remember that specifically, you know, just, it was a lot.
They did. They went, they were in class a lot. And I do remember that. And I also remember the sort of the blogs and the things popping up. This is open, that's open, and that was always such like a celebration. And then you would actually hear them in the halls. Such is open. Oh, let's go. And so it was, you know, little by little.
Then you'd go and wait online for an hour, and then they would run out of food. But you were still happy to be there and waiting online.
I remember Cuda Brown's was open, and they had beer. This is early on when we first get back. They had beer, and they had food. Anything that you could do without water, so anything fried. They would French fries and burgers and, you know, and beer. And so that was like the best thing ever, you know.
Just curious, did Wyman Hall suffer any damage, or what damage was done?
And not to the extent that some other places did. The back, if my memory serves me correctly, the back side of the campus got a little more water than the front side of the campus. The damage that was done was mostly wind related. If you had a wind or debris that broke windows, and then you'd have some the moisture coming in through that. And then the library. Where's James?
I was just going to
the library probably took it the hardest when the roof problems.
There's been a plan for adding on, and there has been scaffolding.
Supposed to start that Monday.
Yeah.
Put in place all along up on the tower where the 4th, 5th, and 6th floor. And when the wind hit, that had blown the scaffolding, and so the water had gotten into the 4th, 5th, and 6th floor.
The flood line was kind of Ferret, so we were just on that. But that was the dividing line. And on one side was color and electricity and normalcy, and on the other side, and I lived 3 blocks that way, was sepia toned and silence and darkness at night. It was really stark.
And Todd Stamps came back early, a few weeks after, and got his whole team together to get the building up and running, and they all did a lot of work.
Yeah.
Early days.
What would you say is the biggest thing as like a faculty or administrator that you took from the storm that perhaps you would do differently, or that you would hope would be done differently if there was another similar type storm?
For Tulane or for the city?
For Tulane.
Well, I think there's a lot of emergency planning that went in. So the servers are now duplicated far away, so that won't go down. There exists social media now, so that's important. We have a system in which you all enter personal emails and contact information so we can find you. That's all born of this experience. Record keeping, of making sure that things are safe. Some of the archives are going up in the main library. What else?
I think the main thing was like we had an emergency plan, but it's been, of course, since then it's much broader and more beefed up and everything. So just having the plan in place, better communication structures, like she says, a better system of backing up your data, or being able to have those, that had that communication line now. So that's something that we did take away, which I think is much improved.
So that stuff's within our control, and there's planning about where the administration will all go, and literally hotel reservations kind of ready if that happens. But the rest of it, so much of it was beyond the university's control. So the incredible ways that it was active and engaged and proactive were amazing. But I think the really astonishing things for the law school and the undergrad and the whole university is how many of our students came back. And the fact that you all got a class that started in 2006 in the fall is, I don't even understand it. But it was a remarkable tribute to how many young people, a lot of whom came here as volunteers on their spring break. You'd see them on the airplane coming down to volunteer, because it's these teenagers who bring their own pillow on the plane, and they come and they gut houses and fall in love with the city. But that kind of willingness to be an adventurer on the front lines that early was amazing. And then the commitment of our students, because this place would not have survived without that. And that was a huge unknown. Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily to answer the question, because I think most of it has been stated, but I'm hoping that Professor Hauk, or he's not technically, but one of the students wrote a really wonderful play. Mary Nagel wrote stories about Katrina, so hopefully it lives somewhere within.
It does.
And maybe that's something that can be shown, because I'm still amazed at the talent and the energy and the dedication and the love that all of those students poured into their experience, and how they shaped, to me, in my opinion, how they just took Tulane to a different level and made it a better, stronger, more meaningful community. Very, very powerful. I see some of the students from the Student Hurricane Network in the back, and they're really shy and founders back there, but that's like again, social media. So now we take it for granted because you just blur something out and 100, 200 people showed up. But that wasn't the case then. And to build that momentum and that energy to draw talent from across the U.S. to help the city rebuild, that was really only happening here at Tulane. And also kudos to faculty as we keep sharing, stories continue to unlock. That relates a little bit to the storyline. Right before we left, I remember closing the office down, and at the time the CDO was housed next door at the annex. It wasn't here. Talking about the construction, I had forgotten about that because we had just finished planning the new CDO that was going to go where the law review suite is after the expansion, and we were so excited. But anyhow, that CDO next door had all of the clerkship applications lined up, all the boxes and everything, because you had to wait because of the moratorium for Labor Day. And we couldn't put them in the mail because you have to adhere. And there was a moment in time that I looked at all those boxes and I was like, should I load them up? And I was like, and do what with them? There were like hundreds and hundreds of boxes. And again, kudos to the faculty, because then we had to recreate those. And then we started reaching out to the faculty and going through the usual, hi, you're well, that's amazing, I'm so happy to hear. Also, there are these 3 students that you wrote letters of recommendation for those clerkships. Do you happen to have that letter on you backed up somewhere? Or if not, could you recreate something amazing that's short and sweet that we can finish the package because again, it wasn't like the jobs weren't stopping. These clerkships were going to be filled and we needed to stay competitive. So something that we learned, and that immediately was like, okay, let's have a plan so that they are in possession of a third party. So should we need to leave and evacuate, that they can still go out in transit. And then something that also came to mind, we learned about the servers, but something that Colleen and I worked on these recreating the list was because the CDO was on Chris, and Chris, that server was Simplicity. Simplicity wasn't affected. It was in Chicago. So actually the one place where we had the student information, because we do upload all the first year information, was on this server. So through the back end, we were able to at least get a glimpse of, oh my gosh, who are the first years? And we're like, oh my gosh, this is where we can find them. And we changed the homepage logging information, and sure enough, the students started to appear through that homepage and sending us information, and we started to recreate the roster unofficially while we were still getting our hands on the official roster. So many things that we were starting to learn as to like what we could do better as we moved through the process and beyond.
And we mentioned the students a lot, and we mentioned faculty as well. And just as the students were going to other places, and we were trying to, talk to the schools about not pilfering off our student enrollment, the faculty were also, there were some faculty I know who were also getting offers elsewhere.
Yeah.
And the majority of the faculty were able to return as well. And they had, their own set of issues. So many of them had children who needed to go to school, and then they had their own, families and everything to deal with. And so the faculty returning and then actually taking on quite a bit of workload themselves, because, like you said, the calendars were very different. We still wanted to give the students the array of classes that they needed, and so you still had the faculty taking on a lot more teaching load than that would normally be done in an academic term. So you have to give them kudos as well, because they also wanted to be back and wanted it to be successful, and were some of the loudest voices that came through about how we should plan and what we should do and the steps we should take moving forward. So they were really, really wonderful.
And Mike, what if and Carlos too, for that matter, in advising students on career opportunities? I'm wondering if the experience of Katrina changed your own thinking at all in terms of your own ambitions professionally, or affected your thinking at all about how you went forward with your careers, or Carlos, if you saw that other students?
I'm more curious to hear from the student side, and then I can jump in.
Because I had taught for 2 years, I had a little bit more time than somebody going straight through to think about, to orient to the professional school environment. So, there were a few of my classmates who were really just getting their bearings. But when I started, I knew Carlos early on, because as soon as I, got back, enrolled in January, I was like, when can we start applying for jobs? What am I going to do this summer? I was very focused on that, throughout law school, because in my mind, law school is the means to the end. And so I remember being able to, I don't know if it was the magic 20%, but I remember actually having lots and lots of options throughout my law school career. So the first summer was only 6 weeks, and I went to Baton Rouge and worked for King Miller and had a really enjoyable experience. So, and then throughout I clerked for places throughout so the next spring I worked for King Miller in New Orleans. The next summer I clerked for Jones Walker and Adams and Reese. So it really went well from there. I think the way our classes were structured, and I really had to focus because we were going to school so often, that it actually the grades that I got were competitive enough. And I worked really closely with the CDO. And so I remember, and maybe it was a little bit of Katrina, something, I don't know. But I remember having loads and loads of options throughout my experience. Now, I will say that for some of my classmates who didn't hit the ground running in that aspect, I think in 2008, when I was planning to go to Jones Walker, for people that started thinking about it then, I think it was a little bit more difficult. But for me, I remember really like hitting the ground running in that area?
I think for me, the experience, well, number one, I think it solidified, my desire to stay in this city, because I think just that experience and sort of the energy that was created from the students, the faculty, and the volunteers, the people that just came into the city to try to, help rebuild, and, was really inspiring. And so I knew then I was staying in New Orleans, not going back to New York. And I think also for me, I think what it changed, I had always, tried to be involved in different groups and organizations, but I thought it made me focus a little bit more and make more meaningful decisions in kind of the groups or organizations that I get involved with around the city or, in other parts of my life, because I think, it was just inspiring to have so many amazing people working together that it really just, I'm trying to think of a specific example. I had one a minute ago. And I lost it, but cause I think this is all bringing up a lot of different stories. But so for me, that was probably the biggest thing too. Is that I think there's a whole new focus on being involved and connected to your community. I think a lot of people have a sense of community, and New Orleans certainly did before the storm. But for me, that took on a whole new meaning after the storm, and it certainly has kind of guided the things that I've done in my professional career since graduating. And I think I've seen that among, sort of the graduates that were involved and the stuff that we've done, outside of our, professional lives, or even within our professional lives, people deciding, I don't want to work at a private law firm, I want to do public interest work, or I want to work in different sectors. So it did change people in a lot of ways.
Yeah, real quickly, I'm glad to hear that from the two of you, because clearly I have my own observations. But in summary, yeah, it was there was a paradigm, there was a shift. And as Mike mentioned, traditionally pre-Katrina, Tulane had become a national-focused law school where most of the interest from the students as well as from employers was mainly drawn from outside of the Louisiana or the Gulf region. And that started to change with the Katrina class, because as they self-selected to be part of this journey of rebuilding, they were so invested into the region that they wanted to stay tied to that region. And that created a shortage of what would normally be the traditional placement for the national market. So then there was scarcity, which is something good in a way, so that for several years there were some of the national employers asking us, well, where are they going? Why aren't we getting? And how could we be losing them to, firms or public interest employers within the Gulf region? And there were plus and minuses, but it really created a new landscape. It also was evident to me, working in my multiple hats, that it also created it inoculated the institution from the market recession that was going to hit the legal market much later. So some of the real tough challenges that as a profession that first hit the market and the practice, and then has now reached the academic trenches very deeply, it would have been much worse for the institution had we been at the size that we were of 300 plus, which was the size of my class. And moving forward, Katrina asked us to retinker and build a new business model that was responsive to that new reality. And in some ways, it became somewhat of a blessing. Now I have some, and we can discourse afterwards as to, where do we lie now? Is our focus now too regional versus too national, and what's the legal landscape, and how is the profession evolving, and what's the obligations from the academic side versus the capacity of the market? And if you're following the New York Times or any of we're writing about this on a daily basis as to what is the profession headed, what is the responsibility of the ABA. But I don't think you asked that, so I'll pause.